They said that we were moving out so that the Americans could train. But I mean, we hadn't a clue what for or anything.
To us, it looks joyful and wonderful, but the guys actually got to fight their way through. Absolute nightmare.
They remained fearful of ever talking about it because they were under threat of court-martial.
This is the story of Exercise Tiger. This rarely seen footage shows the build-up to the exercise during World War II, a large-scale, highly secretive training mission in Devon that was crucial to the success of the D-Day landings. It's a story that for decades remained secret due to the huge loss of life. The quiet calm of Slapton Sands today is in stark contrast to what happened here on April 28, 1944. Slapton Sands is a 3-mile shingle beach. Running parallel along a large proportion of it is a freshwater lake. This location was picked as a training area by the Allied nations in World War II because of the strikingly similar topography to Utah Beach in Normandy. Tens of thousands of American soldiers and sailors were involved in a dress rehearsal amphibious landing on Slapton Sands in the spring of 1944, practicing for when they would land in Normandy to begin the liberation of German-occupied Western Europe. On the shores of Slapton Sands, to make it as realistic as possible, live ammunition was used to give soldiers the sounds and smells of what it would be like in northern France. As troops moved up the beach, due to a communication failure and timing issue, live shelling claimed the lives of hundreds of Americans. But the tragedy didn't stop there. In the early hours of April the 28th, 8 US tank landing ships were making their way from Lyme Bay to Slapton when they were torpedoed and attacked by undetected German E-boats. 2 LSTs were sunk and 1 was badly damaged. Over 700 Americans died. Details of exactly what happened only started to come to light after the discovery of an American Sherman tank off the coast of Devon. Meet Dean Small. It's thanks to the tireless work of his father Ken Small in the 70s and 80s that the tank was found.
His curiosity got the better of him, and that's when he discovered that there was something on the seabed 3/4 of a mile off the shore that fishermen would snag their nets on. And he couldn't understand why the fishermen didn't want to know what it was. And eventually, after a degree of pressure, a good friend of his, a local fisherman, said that he would dive down and have a look and see what it was. And he famously came up to the boat, and my dad said, "What is it?" And he said, "It's a tank." And my dad said, "What, a water tank, an oil tank?" And he said, "No, it's an army tank."
After years of gathering information about why the tank was there and eventually buying the Sherman from the US government, the vehicle was recovered in 1984. It now acts as a permanent reminder of what happened in the April of 1944.
My dad was really moved by it, immensely so. It had a real effect on him. And I think, like many people, he could imagine what it must have been like on that night. You had hundreds and hundreds of young, very young, most of them 17, 18, some lied about their age and were actually 16. And there they were in Lyme Bay, not really knowing what was going on. They knew they were practicing, but they didn't know what for. It was 2 o'clock in the morning approximately, and then all of a sudden they come under attack from German E-boats. And it was, I've spoken to veterans, and some of them even said they thought it was just part of reenactment, that they were just making it more real. But I think the aftermath of it, yes, I think we can all understand the need for the secrecy because of the D-Day landings that were coming up and the fear that the Germans would find out what was happening. I think what really got to my dad was the lack of acknowledgement that came after the war. And for the surviving veterans, many of which my father met over a period of many years, that really hurt them. And of course, they remained fearful of ever talking about it because they were under threat of court-martial. And so, I mean, many of their friends, relatives, their local communities often didn't believe them when they eventually started to talk about it. They said, well, no, we've never heard about that. And so that affected my dad. And of course, you know, loss of life it has a ripple effect. You know, one person dies, that's bad enough, but the effect on family members, brothers, sisters, friends, it's awful, you know. So it was very emotional for my dad. You know, he did live most of his life under this umbrella of this tragedy, but that just made him more determined that these men wouldn't be forgotten.
It's thought one of the reasons Exercise Tiger was kept secret is because military leaders didn't want troops to lose morale before the actual D-Day landings took place.
Like with any operation, you've got to rehearse. And I think, fortunately, this offered them a great opportunity to go through the drills. Imagine the guys, you know, coming out waist deep or sometimes neck deep and then having to push their way up through. And it's not sand, it is actually ankle deep shale, which then just grinds you down. So you just can't imagine it. So mix up in communication on the actual rehearsal day when the Navy were firing too late, when the guys were on the beach. And from that, massive lessons was learned. And they do say, in a way, if that hadn't happened, maybe it would have been far, far worse on D-Day.
For Exercise Tiger to take place, around 3,000 local residents were evacuated. They had just weeks to find somewhere else to live and had no idea when they'd be allowed back to their homes.
In the winter of 1943, coastal communities were told to leave the area. Pam Wills was just 10 at the time. Now in her 90s, she lives in the same house she had to leave during World War II.
We were sort of hard done by because we had to get out within 6 weeks. We had to find somewhere to live. We had to take our stuff away, you know, and it's not like the evacuees at, say, London, that were evacuated. They had places to go. And, you know, sort of over the months, they sort of organised that. But not us. We had to go within 6 weeks. No ifs or buts. You went. And before we went, I was one of the last children here. So I was wandering around the village on my own, didn't know what to do with myself. Met these two army chaps taking photographs. And they must have been Americans because they said that, would I mind if they took my photograph of me walking through the village? So I said, no. So they said, well, will you pretend you're walking into one of the houses? I said, yeah, okay. So they had me walking into one of the houses. And he said, we're taking these photographs because we want to send them back home to show people what you're doing for us. Because it was, I mean, a lot of people didn't know the Americans were coming here to train. So that was the sort of the first thing I knew about it. And then, of course, we moved down to Beeson then in the November.
Pam didn't return to her home until nearly a year later. The beaches had recovered from the onslaught of landing craft, tanks, soldiers and firing. With the invasion of Normandy a success and a turning point in the fight against Nazi Germany, what happened at Slapton Sands was washed away by time. Thanks for watching. For more from Forces News, like and subscribe to our channel.